Today, I'm talking about flare-ups. So if you have endometriosis or an autoimmune condition and you're dealing with flare-ups, hopefully this video is going to give you some helpful information so you can understand why you're getting them and what you can do to prevent them. So this video I was inspired to record because this past weekend, I myself had a flare-up of endometriosis. If you don't already know my history, I have both endometriosis and an autoimmune condition, which is why I talk about this a lot. And so my endometriosis and autoimmune conditions are very well controlled now. And they weren't always. And in 2016, I had an extremely terrible flare-up of both of these conditions after a very stressful event, a series of very stressful events in my life. And actually, I had gotten so bad that I was bedbound for several months. That's how bad my conditions had deteriorated to. And the medical system wasn't helping me. They were basically telling me that I was making it up. I was too sensitive. It was in my head. There was nothing that they can do. And I know if you're watching this and you have one of these conditions, I know that you've probably heard these things as well. So I went searching for answers and I found some. And it's been quite a journey to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. I dug into the scientific research and I put puzzle pieces together from what I figured out in the research that's not in the medical system yet, but I'm sure it will be. It takes about 10 to 20 years before new research actually starts to make, significant adjustments in the medical system in terms of how they treat conditions, especially chronic conditions like these. So the point is that my flare-ups these days are very few and far between. And if I have a flare-up, there's a reason why. And I want to mention this because if you're dealing with flare-ups, there's also a reason why you're experiencing these flare-ups as well. And the more you can understand about it, the more empowered you are to be able to take better control over your situation and your symptoms. And so the problem is that sometimes it's not always clear cut about when a flare-up happens and why, because usually it's a multifactorial process. Sometimes it's never just one thing that actually triggers the flare-up. It's usually a combination of things, as is the case with my flare-up that I had this past weekend. So basically what happened was, as I approached this coming weekend, so first of all, I was getting prepared to travel, which can be a stressful experience, right? You're packing and then you're traveling and you're on the road, and this can be stressful in and of itself. And right now, with the global situation, traveling and being careful, and there's added stress. So there was a stress there. Second of all was my mother's birthday. And so my mother passed away 4 years ago, and this was actually one of the major stressors that triggered my flare-up to begin with. My mother had terminal cancer, and I was caring for her. And when she ended up in the hospital, I slept in a chair beside her bed for almost a month and had very little sleep during that time. So, the emotional stress, the physical stress of getting very little sleep, it took its toll on me. And once she passed away, that's when the flare started. So there's a lot of emotion this weekend because of that. And then my monthly cycle was starting at the same time. So we have these triggers. And then I also ended up having a food that in small amounts I can tolerate. However, I ended up eating a little bit more than I probably should have. Now, that on its own probably would have been fine. But if you put the food paired with the emotions, paired with the stress, paired with the hormones associated with the monthly cycle and all the inflammation associated with that, all of that triggered the flare-up. So probably if there's only just one thing, like if I had the emotions of my mom's birthday, but I stayed at home and my diet didn't change and my monthly cycle didn't happen to show up at that time, it probably would have been fine. If I would have had the food and I wasn't stressed and I wasn't traveling, I probably would have been fine. So sometimes it's the combination of things. And that's why sometimes when you eat a food, you're fine with it. But then another time you eat the food, you don't feel well. And you're like, well, must not be the food because the last time I had it, I was fine. But it might be all the other things going on, right? Maybe you were more stressed or emotional the second time you ate it and you had the reaction, where the other time, you were calm, or maybe you didn't sleep well that night because sleep is another physical stressor. And so maybe, if you pair not sleeping well that night plus that particular food that maybe in a small amount another time may have been okay, all of a sudden it's not okay. So it's really important to just be aware of all the different factors that can play into what can trigger your symptoms and what can trigger flare-ups. And the more you can be aware of all these different variables and how they interplay, the more then you can sort of account for it and prevent it by understanding your situation, your triggers, and how they can add up. And so, for example, one example of preventing this would be, say, for example, if you're stressed and you're going through a stressful situation, then to prevent potential flare-ups and triggers of your symptoms, it's important to make sure that your diet is more on point. So try to avoid potentially aggravating and inflammatory foods during this time can help to minimize or prevent flare-ups. Or if you eat a food that could potentially be triggering, then you want to keep your stress in check. Make sure you're sleeping well. Do some things to make sure that you're managing your stress, whether it be taking regular breaks, asking for help, doing some exercises that will help to calm your nervous system down, like deep breathing, for example. So kind of paying attention to all the different variables, and if one variable is out of balance, trying to work on getting those other variables as balanced as possible can help you to prevent the flare and to get through it more quickly. And so what I did when I ended up with this flare was, as soon as I realized what was going on, I decided to even though I was traveling and I was visiting family and there was all kinds of food around, I knew that diet is a big variable for me. And so I went back to the basics. Even though there's all sorts of other things that I could have enjoyed that I can tolerate on a normal basis in small amounts, or if I'm not stressed, I knew that that was not smart for me to indulge in those things. And so what I ended up doing was going back to my meat-only reset. And so I only ate meat and fish during this time for the rest of the weekend. I also made sure to take some breaks, right? Because I was with a family and there was a lot going on. So I made sure that they knew that I needed to take care of myself, and they were okay with that. So I went off and had quiet time when I needed it and relaxed. And that really helped me to take the pressure off. So it's really important to do things that you know to take care of yourself, not to push yourself, especially during a flare-up. This is the time for you, especially, to take the time and do the self-care, to calm your nervous system down, to take care of yourself, to give yourself the things that you need and give yourself the nutrition that you need, and to avoid the things that are potentially going to be inflammatory or problematic for you. So with all the things that I did, going back to the meat-only reset, taking some time to relax on my own, the flare passed pretty quickly. That evening was uncomfortable, and I breathed through it, and I took some time alone, and that really helped me to get me centered. By the next morning, I was 75 to 80% better, and sticking to my meat-only reset, by the end of that day, I was okay again. And so understanding as well, trying to accept that I knew this flare was going to pass. So I was not tied to the pain. I knew it was going to pass. I accepted it and I tried to feel my way through it as much as I could, as opposed to trying to avoid it and push it away and fight against it. Because when we do these things, it actually can make the pain worse, harder to deal with, and more difficult to clear, if that makes sense. And I'm going to be writing a post about this soon, and I think that maybe I'll have to turn that into a video too. Because I think that's another big piece of the puzzle in dealing with flare-ups and pain is how you think about them and manage the pain while you're in the moment of it. And that can really help you to get through it more quickly and easily. So the point of this video was, again, if you're experiencing a flare-up, understanding what triggered it in the first place can help you to prevent it and to understand where it came from and to start to adjust your variables so that you can get through it more quickly. Understanding that sometimes there's multiple variables that can actually be triggering the flare-up. So something that maybe on a regular basis when you're calm might not be a problem. All of a sudden you add stress and the food together, for example, that could trigger a flare-up. So understanding what the variables are for you are going to help you to better understand what you can do to get better control over your flare-ups and your symptoms. So if you found this helpful, I encourage you to hit subscribe. Generating these videos is a new process for me. I'll be creating more as time goes on, but please feel free to check out my posts on my other social media platforms. I have much more information there about endometriosis and autoimmune conditions and how to get better control over them using diet, stress management, and mindset work. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and I'll link all of the links below so that you can get access to them.